Why, hello there. It is 74 days until the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC comes out, and this is the Elden Wait Countdown. A series discussing the upcoming DLC to make the wait just a little bit shorter. Alright, I can't see shit in these. I have to take this off. So at the time of recording, it is April 8th, 2024, and the DLC, of course, comes out on June 21st, 2024, but the significance of today is that today was a lunar eclipse that actually I was in the path of totality for, so I got to see an eclipse today, which was pretty cool. In our world, the moon moves in front of the sun and eclipses it for a few minutes. It becomes like nighttime and gets a little colder and looks wicked cool. But in the world of Elden Ring, the eclipse has additional meaning, which I would like to talk about today as it could pertain to the DLC. Let's get into it. To discuss eclipses in Elden Ring, the first thing we need to talk about is Castle Soul. The Eclipse Shodal item description says that it's the storied sword and treasure of Castle Soul that depicts an eclipsed sun drained of color, one of the legendary armaments in Soul. The sight of an eclipse inspires a dreadful awe, preventing an onlooker from averting his gaze. But the eclipse has more meaning at Castle Soul than just that. One of the ghosts in Castle Soul says, "O great sun, frigid sun of soul, surrender yourself to the eclipse, grant life to the soulless bone." And from another ghost in Castle Soul, we have this very intriguing line, "Lord Miquella, forgive me. The sun has not been swallowed, our prayers were lacking. Your comrade remains soulless, I will never set my eyes upon it now, your divine Erdtree." So let's start with the basic fact that the sun has not been swallowed, obviously a reference to the eclipse, and they're saying that their prayers were lacking, your comrade remains soulless, which is important to remember because that ties in a motivation for Miquella to cause an eclipse to happen. But what exactly, how does an eclipse relate to this soulless comrade? We'll get more into the comrade in a moment, but for now, let's see what the eclipse and being soulless may have to do with one another. And this is where the wandering mausoleums come into play. The Eclipse Crest Heater Shield of the Mausoleum Knight says, "The sun in eclipse is said to be the symbol of the wandering mausoleum where the soulless demigods slumber." The Eclipse Crest Great Shield says, "Eclipse sun, drained of color, is the protective star of soulless demigods. It aids the Mausoleum Knights by keeping destined death at bay." So what we're getting here is that the Eclipse Sun is a symbol of the wandering mausoleums and the Mausoleum Knights because it is this protective star of soulless demigods, and it keeps destined death at bay. So what I'm getting from this is that it's preventing these soulless demigods from experiencing a full death. And going back to the lore ghost talking with Lord Miquella, your comrade remains soulless. So who is this comrade? There are varying opinions. There is a good video by Cosmos which presents someone who is not Godwyn. I recommend checking out that video for another take. Other videos talk about it being Godwyn, and the reasoning being that there's this item description for the gold epitaph sword which says, "A sword made to commemorate the death of Godwyn the Golden, first of the demigods to die, infused with the humble prayer of a young boy," which we are supposing in this case would be Miquella due to his young appearance and the fact that he may have been young at this time. "O brother, Lord brother, please die a true death." In this case, it is supposing that Godwyn is being talked about and that Miquella's motivation is that he wants to grant Godwyn a full death. And either way, there's this plausible idea that Miquella was trying to bring about an eclipse due to soulless demigod reasons. And an interesting thing about that is that at Castle Soul, it ultimately failed, and the ghost says their prayers were lacking, but there's another explanation that people brought up, and that's the fact that Radahn halted the stars, and that the eclipse is, this protective star, and that in this case, Radahn is keeping this from being able to happen as a result of him holding the stars in place. And so where this gets interesting to me is that we have these pieces that have a number of different interpretations of how they could ultimately come together. However, with the Shadow of the Erdtree, one of the prerequisites is to defeat Radahn, seemingly to release the stars and let them continue their movements, which then could relate to Miquella trying to bring about an eclipse. And something interesting about that is when you're talking about the Shadow of the Erdtree, an eclipse is the moon moving in front of the sun in this case, as is shown by the Shodel and other stuff. This is a lunar eclipse, and perhaps the effects could be in the Shadowlands, and the fact that it's casting a shadow brings in themes of shadow, which will definitely be dealt with in the Shadow of the Erdtree. And so I'm just thinking there's a lot of potential here for this thread and this motivation of Miquella trying to bring about an eclipse, and maybe it could have been something that wasn't happening in the lands between as we know it, but happening in the land of shadow, potentially, which makes sense for an eclipse. So I think this is something that's worth keeping in mind. We haven't seen any wandering mausoleums shown for Shadow of the Erdtree. I'd be interested to see if they're there. We know that based on the architecture on them and just where they're located, that, has eternal city connections, which connects to Nox, which connects to, Marika via being Newman, and so there's a lot of potential there. So it's all worth keeping in mind. And the fact that there's an interpretation where the comrade, is Godwyn, and that the eclipse that Miquella is trying to do has relating to Godwyn is also interesting to keep in mind, because we've seen sort of death symbolism in the Shadow of the Erdtree, and the fact is that Godwyn died in soul only, and that means that Godwyn did not return to the Erdtree, but it brings about the question of, was Godwyn's soul just destroyed, or where did Godwyn actually go? We know that Godwyn has a deathbed dream, which relates to Saint Trina, and stuff like that. There's a whole bunch of the metaphor mixing around here, and I think it's worth keeping this eclipse imagery in mind, especially given the architecture of that one sort of crucible-like building, as it also is a bit eclipse in nature. So it's worth keeping in mind, especially as we are looking for imagery talking about the sun, eclipse, Miquella, and the soulless demigods. It's just all worth keeping in mind and knowing about going into the DLC. So there you have it, 74 days until Shadow of the Erdtree comes out on June 21st, 2024. I'm very excited. It was very cool seeing the eclipse today. It's like I was living, in Dark Souls 3 for a moment, which was terrifying and exciting all at the same time. But, if you would like to join me on the journey to the Shadow of the Erdtree, please like this video, subscribe to the Lore Hunter, turn notifications on so that you get videos as they come out. Thanks for watching.